Hi, my name's Lyn, Hippie Lyn, Rainbow Lyn, Lyn Lovell, or sometimes Lyn Lovell. I'm part of the rainbow movement, and I'm really concerned that all our history should maybe could get lost once we are all passed on to somewhere else if we don't get it recorded. History is always written by the victors. But I want our history to be written by us. And that's why I want to make some recordings, tell some stories, and encourage other people to do so too. Because I really want our rainbow history to be available for our children and grandchildren and whatever history happens in the future. I don't want it to be lost. So I'm going to tell some stories. And I'm going to start with reading an article that I wrote for the Rainbow Circle Newsletter in 1995. Now, by this time, Rainbow Circle had been going for 7 years, and a split had happened. So this is the history as far as that split. Doesn't go further, but we will go further after in a different video. So I'm going to read from this article. It's called Back to 1984, and it's a bit of herstory from Lyn. I suppose it all started in the 60s with the free gigs. Lots of beautiful people gathering outside to listen to music, smoking, drinking, picnicking, hopefully in the sunshine. Weekend festivals were the logical progression, and the festivals, especially the free festivals, which were even longer, introduced the largely urban middle-class hippie scene to camping. In those days, festivals were gentle and happy scenes where everyone met up and had good fun for a few days. Hippies already had a strong sense of community, and family camping at the festivals strengthened those bonds. And a new sort of bonding started to happen, a bonding with nature and a love of being outside. Campfires, storytelling, spontaneous music, the moon, the stars, the sunshine, the rain and mud, it all led to a strong sense of togetherness. In the 70s, festivals and fairs mushroomed, providing a summertime way of life for dropouts who didn't want to be part of the rat race. They also provided an income for craftspeople and traders who could supplement their dole or even become independent of the state. The travelling scene grew out of this as an alternative to going back to the hassle and persecution of city life. It was a way of staying together and a way of becoming more in tune with nature. The green gatherings, Greenham Common and Molesworth, all expressed the political edge, which had developed through the Aldermaston C&D marches, the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations, and the squatting movement. This introduced camping and outdoor life to the politicos, as well as drawing more festival goers, hippies, and travelling people into the political scene. It also expanded political consciousness to include the less overt but highly subversive, let's get back to the land, be together, honour the earth and have a good time philosophy. In the 80s, things began to change fast. The "you've never had it so good" philosophy, which had kept the Tories in government in the 60s, had now become "I'm all right, Jack," once they got back into power in the late 70s. Greed and grab was the name of the game, and exploitation one of the ground rules. Society, as used in the sense of social consciousness and responsibility, was a non-existent word in Maggie Thatcher's vocabulary. Money became the god, and your duty was to get as much of it as possible, especially if you already had loads. This atmosphere invaded the festivals, and dealers who used to be everyone's friends were marginalised by organised gangs of criminals who were only interested in making money. By 1984, the Stonehenge Free Festival was huge and lasted for weeks. But as well as being an amazing opportunity for the alternative culture to express its creativity, it was also characterised by the advertising and selling of hard drugs by gangs of thugs with guns who had no interest in or respect for the culture that they were trashing. Alcohol abuse, not previously a significant part of the alternative culture, was also prevalent. Also, in 1984, the camps from which Rianbow Circle is directly descended started to happen. These were the first of the small, focused, educational, magical camps in this country. On the August Bank Holiday weekend, within the site of Glastonbury Tor, the first astrology camp was put on by Peldon Jenkins. The intention was that a group of astrologers would gather to exchange ideas, a sort of conference in a field. We would all pay to take part in this conference and get a weekend's camping as well. It was a magic camp. The sun shone bright in the day, and in the evening the mist of Avalon shrouded the camp in mystery. Each morning and evening, yes, twice a day, we sat in a big circle and discussed all sorts of issues, amongst which was what workshops were going to happen. There were 2 or 3 workshops to choose from at any one time, and we paid £1 a workshop, which went direct to the workshop leader, and which actually added up to quite a lot over 4 days. It was a gentle, loving, happy atmosphere, and the camp was a great success. The powwows were great at first. We all sat in a circle and we sang chants, we spoke our truth. We could all get to know who was on the camp, listen to their ideas, decide whether we wanted to go to their workshops. However, the powwows rapidly became very lengthy and inconclusive, and people stopped going to them. Then they started to start late, as not everyone was there. And then the workshops couldn't start because the powwow was still happening. Does this sound familiar? 3 10-day camps were planned for 1985. Beltane, music and dance, and astrology. By the time the astrology camp happened, Peldon was being hustled to allow various musicians and friends to stay on. The familiar argument was put forward. It doesn't cost any extra to let people stay, and they've got lots to contribute. Peldon's point of view was that they were not astrologers, and that anyway, they should not assume that it was okay to stay on without making any arrangements. A huge powwow ensued, and Peldon lost. We did have an absolutely brilliant astrology camp, but needless to say, it didn't make any money. On the last day, we had to have a whip round just to cover the costs. The following year, 1986, the camps were put on by Glastonbury Camps. This was a group formed to share the burden of organisation and responsibility, so that Peldon wouldn't be carrying it all. There were 2 parts to it. A core group who organised the site, the equipment and the crew, and a tone group who organised the content of each camp. All members of both groups were due to be paid for their organisational work, should there be any profits. Well, there weren't and they weren't. But Paulden felt that several people who were part of these groups hadn't pulled their weight and that he had been left doing most of the work. That summer, he started to pull together a group who would approach the job professionally. And in the autumn, the Oak Dragon Project was formed. The Oak Dragon Project was set up as a limited company with 5 directors: Paulden, January, Ros, Mike Blackwood and Chrissy. It was to put on a full season of camps where everyone would be on a wage. £100 for site crew, £300 for coordinating, and £500 for Paulden, and possibly the other directors. Ticket prices were high, £60 or £80, depending on the camp. Half price for children and no concessions. We have to remember here that we are talking about 1986, and these amounts of money could be multiplied by 10 or 15 times when you think about today's money. Anyway, unfortunately, their projected income didn't materialize. They had budgeted, on Paulden's advice, for 130 people coming to each camp. And in the event, there were only about 70 at most camps. That meant that after the first camp and a half, everyone was asked to work for free. Some people could not, but most people worked for free. Even so, by the end of the season, the Oak Dragon Project was £36,000 in debts, which was huge. And 23,500 of that was to the bank. This debt takes a lot of servicing, and it has been on their backs ever since. But this wasn't the only problem. Right from the start, Paulden hadn't wanted to have Sid around. It was only because he couldn't get any other children's area as good as Jules that he had agreed to Sid coming. Basically, they both wanted to swan around as king of the camps. And Sid was rather better at that than Paulden. As the financial position worsened, so Paulden's irritation with Sid grew, to the point that he refused to speak to him, or even be in the same space. At the astrology camp, a reconciliation process was initiated, with some of the members of the Atlantis community in Ireland as mediators. After several hours, Paulden broke down and agreed to make an effort to get on with Sid. But that didn't make much difference, really. We moved to Aberystwyth for the music and dance camp and the harmonic conversions. The undercurrents were running high. The high-profile dance teachers swanned in, encouraging everyone to smile at each other, which, of course, only made things worse. When people have got a lot of stuff that needs sorting out, there's nothing like a good dose of sweetness and light to really inflame their tempers. Sid and I ran an ongoing small group sharing space. I shall be the gripes coordinator, he would say. Bring your gripes to me. All sorts of issues were up. With hindsight, I can see that most of them had to do with power. Who paid and who got paid, and most important, who decided. Decision-making had become something that happened in Paulden's Dome at 4 o'clock in the morning, with whoever could stay the journey. Paulden thought that all the decisions should ultimately be his, since he had started the Oak Dragon, and he had carried the ongoing weight of making it happen. At the last camp, the Oak Dragon family camp, we, the people, had an ongoing meeting in the Oak Dragon teepee to try and sort out what we wanted from the camps and how we would like them to be run. We then had various suggestions that we wanted to put to Paldon and Roz, but they weren't interested in coming to any of the TP meetings. Eventually, right at the end of the season, a directors' meeting was held. It was a dramatic day. Mike Blackwood, one of the directors, had been afraid that Paldon and Roz, who by this time were effectively running the show, were going to chuck him out. And since he had about £4,000 invested with the Oak Dragon, he wanted the support of the meeting. Several of us went along to give him that support, but Paldon objected, and most people were excluded. But some of us managed to remain. Ian Roberts, because Paldon thought he could count on his support, Johanna as Mike's girlfriend, Ivan as the tea maker, me as the minute taker, and Barbara because she wouldn't go away, as she was felt to be fairly harmless. We were all sworn to secrecy, unless the directors were to approve of any disclosure. The meeting was set for 2 p.m, and Mike had called a powwow to happen after the end of the meeting, which we thought would probably be about 5. Mike wanted to tell everyone what the outcome was. Well, the meeting went on and on. Rumours in the camp were rife and feelings were running high, so everyone was waiting for the powwow. The meeting went on through tea time, on through supper time, until after 8 o'clock. The people who'd been part of it were all exhausted by then. But the next day was the end of the season, the close of the first year, the final powwow. This other powwow had to happen before that. So, in an unheated marquee on a chilly September night, the powwow happened. Everyone sat expectantly, wanting to know what had gone on. Roz suggested that she should read out what had been on the agenda for the directors' meeting, and that anyone could ask specific questions. There were a few things that had been covered that hadn't been on the agenda, so I offered to add them in. Silence greeted this offer. After a good half-minute, there was a huge gust of wind, and something loud fell over, and the spell was broken. 3 separate times I made this offer. The 3rd time it was accepted. I mentioned several things before getting to the bit about Sid and Jules. Well, it had been decided at the meeting not to employ Jules, and therefore Sid, in the following year. Ah, that was what they'd been waiting for. This was what had been hidden. People were shocked and indignant. Jeremy Sanford suggested having a round on what people felt about it. This round became the opportunity to everyone to say everything that they had been wanting to say all summer. There had been no other opportunity. Paldon called us all fools. Sig, sarcastically, and on the anti-hierarchy at that stage, asked why we thought we should have a say in our lives. Children should do as they were told. Roz tried to salvage the situation by being reasonable, but the situation was unsalvageable. The next day at the final powwow, Paldon broke the talking stick and threw it into the fire. And Johanna called a meeting at Ferngrove on the 20th to the 22nd of November. We actually opened this meeting at 1 p.m. on the 21st, with about 30 to 40 people in the circle. That was when Rianbow Circle was born. For me, Rianbow Circle was a commitment to working in circles and trying to find new organisational structures where people did not feel disempowered. Barbara Davis insisted that we should emphasise the open circle, and there was good support for this. Years later, Sid told me that he was only in Rainbow Circle because the option of working for Oak Dragon ceased to be available to him. So people were actually coming from many different spaces, and yet we thought we were all together. As soon as we started to put camps on, we ran up against the same difficulties that Oak Dragon had had. Since we weren't paying anyone, this ultimately came down to who worked, who paid, and how much, and most important, who decided. Although we had the same problems, we prided ourselves initially in dealing differently and more openly. This sort of worked for the first year, but by the summer of '89, we had serious problems. Was Rainbow Circle going to continue to do educational camps? Or was it to become a travelling circus? Or a Christie Parker? A front for travellers to move legally around, conducting their own business? A tribe of summertime festival goers without any festivals? An ongoing lifestyle? A party, an ongoing party opportunity. During the winter of '89-90, we had 3 stuff sorting meetings. One was on an afternoon, the second was a weekend, and the third was 3.5 days, going on until 6 a.m. on the last morning. Those of us who wanted to continue doing educational camps had fought to keep it that way, and at a cost we'd won. The cost was openness and trust. By this time, everyone was fed up with meetings, so things started to get decided by whoever was doing them. And more often this was Sid. More and more people dropped away, some for financial reasons, some because they felt vibed out, some for other personal reasons. Particularly Myra, Mike Blackwood, and Hannah dropped out. This left Sid, Jules, and me from the original group. Of course, there were others who were very long-standing, but where to draw the line? Who should be consulted on decisions? The issues that came up then are currently being addressed by our ethics and structure groups. This was just after the reformation of Rainbow Circle, you must realise. Our ethics and structure groups, yeah. Thank goodness. They are difficult issues and need time and dedication. Of course, we could have readopted totally open democracy, but personally, I don't think that would have been appropriate. At our Glastonbury meetings, for instance, people would walk in off the street and they could speak and vote without having even been to a camp. Most associations have memberships that you just pay money to join, and that often leads to people making decisions on issues in which they may have little interest, about which they may have absolutely no information, and or where they need to take absolutely no responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. Been there, done that. A more subtle problem is that of hidden agendas. So it's great that we now have a large group of people all putting their heads together to sort it out. When, in 1990, Jules rented the Blackthorn Farm bungalow for the winter, Sid was finally on the phone. With no restraining structure in place, he took over more and more of the day-to-day running of Rainbow Circle. He put his mates into positions of responsibility, which on the whole they fulfilled admirably, and he spent Rainbow Circle money, sometimes without consulting people, usually on things that were desperately needed, like the new dome covers. However, there were also perks. Had Rainbow Circle had a structure that could approve these perks, they probably would have all passed through unopposed, at least initially. For example, food and fuel are essentials when you are out sight hunting. even breakfasts in off-site cafes, which allow headspace to sort out political or organisational issues, etc. That doesn't seem too outrageous. And anyway, Sid did so much work that a few breakfasts seemed okay to me. But with no mechanism for checks, the ground became more and more dodgy. Ultimately, this led to an uprising in 1992, with Pluto at 22 Scorpio square the Rainbow Circle ascendant of 22 Aquarius. The uprising didn't succeed, mainly, I think, because it wasn't about the real problem, which I see as a lack of definition about who we are, what we're doing, and where we're coming from, and a lack of an appropriate structure to encompass this, preventing hierarchy whilst acknowledging the importance of experience. In 1994, with Pluto and Jupiter on the Rainbow Circle Sun at 28.5 Scorpio, there was revolution. The revolution did succeed, and these issues are now being addressed. Let's hope we can sort them out. There are still many different views of what the Rainbow Circle might be. The challenge is to establish core values that are broad enough for us all to agree with, but allowing details to be decided as individual circumstances arise. It seems to me that the most important thing is to have in place an agreed structure that reflects our basic position. Once we've decided what that is, that way issues can be brought up and taken through an accepted procedure. The proposed council will be our next experiment in the structure of decision-making and problem-solving. Hopefully the ethics group, which is said to continue throughout the summer and probably forever, will not shrink from defining some behaviour as unacceptable, whilst allowing the person underneath that behaviour still to be okay. This process is a complex one, but helping individual people, including ourselves, to change and grow is essential to a healthy society. There will always be problems. It's how we deal with them that's important. Most problems have their deepest roots in fear. We all need to learn to trust and not to be afraid if we are going to change the world and establish the rainbow vision of peace and love.